Welcome, everyone. I think I'm live. I'm going to be discussing and introducing my course on German idealism, which I'm offering again in a renewed version this summer. So this will be part of the Halcyon Summer School this year. There will be a couple of courses. If you know anyone, I'm going to be speaking for about 30 minutes. If you know anyone who's interested in German idealism, Kant, Fichte, Schelling, Hölderlin, Hegel, then please just send them a link to this live stream right now. And if you have any questions, please let me know in the chat and I'll respond at the end of this live stream. I want to just go over very briefly what the course is about, who we're going to read, and why, and what we're going to read in a focus. On this, just a second, sorry. All right. Okay, good. So, as said before, if you know anyone interested in German idealism, broadly speaking, just let them know that I'm live now. Of course, there will be a replay as well, so you can just watch this anytime. There is a link in the description of this video, or there should be at least, I hope, where you can get the study guide, or more formally speaking, the syllabus for this course. I'll also try and share it here. So this is a course on German idealism I'm offering through my Halcyon Guild Academy. This is the second time I run it. It was one of the most successful courses last year. And that's why I want to offer it again, because quite a few people have asked me if I could teach it again as quickly as possible. So I will. There will be another course actually that I teach in parallel to that one, which will be my course Leisure with Dignity. But now here we focus on German idealism. So what is the course about and how does it all tie together? What is it that we mean by German idealism? In some sense, German idealism is in the background of some of the most important thinkers that come after that time. Nietzsche and Marx, obviously. Marx is a subverter of Hegel. Nietzsche can only be a great destroyer, and he may be suffering from lean into it when we open it up, how they were to the cosmic dimension of what it means to be human, especially someone like Hölderlin and Hegel were. And with, just to mention all the names, Husserl and Heidegger, obviously Derrida, Deleuze, Sartre wouldn't be possible, wouldn't have become what they became without German idealism. But the course will not focus on these figures. By the way, also, if you're interested in these spooky internet theories of accelerationism, Nick Land's take on Kant, etc., in order to understand what someone like Nick Land and others are saying, you need to have a firm grounding in Kant. There are many videos on my channel on Kant, on Hegel, on Schelling, on someone Hölderlin as well. Some of the figures that are not so well known, so you can listen to those now if you just need to make sure whether this course is for you. Now, there's a recent one which I published just a couple of days ago on Kant and spaceships. So what we'll focus on really is the logic behind it all, especially when it comes to Kant. So there's a crude misconception about Kant, which assumes that Kant's first critique is an epistemology. So broadly speaking, the question, how do we know what we know? How is it that we know anything? All of this. And of course, you can read that into Kant, but that's not really what's happening in the first critique. So what we'll focus on in Kant is, and the two lectures on Kant are the task of the first critique, and also It's the transcendental aesthetics, so space and time. I think what Kant sees, and he says this himself on the very first page of the first introduction to the first critique, he says that metaphysics has become a battlefield. Human reason, he says, has this peculiar fate to be addressed by a question it cannot hope to answer. By the way, one of the comments I got last year from a student on this course was that aside from being within a group of people and being able to study these texts, it also I think what he was very grateful for was to be no longer just in awe of these big names and great texts, which they are, but to be able to access them in a way that's also opening up the dimensions that they contain, in which we dwell and live and die, because that's what philosophy does. It bursts open realms. Some of them perhaps shouldn't be burst open sometimes, but that's a different story. And that they enable a certain way of being. And as you will find another video of mine, that it is because of Kant's transcendental idealism that we are or have become capable of flying airplanes. I won't go into this here. So the task of the first critique, though, what Kant sees at the time of his writing, and this is when he becomes a significant philosopher with the first critique, not so much before perhaps, except maybe for the prolegomena. Kant, as he says about Hume, Hume awoke him from his dogmatic slumbers. What does dogmaticism mean here? The metaphysics of the time was one which, with, for example, Leibniz and others, or Wolff, was able to generate sophisticated, coherent systems of thought that are within themselves coherent, as I said before, but at the same time, as for example Leibniz's monadology, they have no experiential content. And on the other extreme side, you have the so-called empiricists. John Locke, Bishop Berkeley, not Berkeley as the Americans say, Bishop Berkeley, and David Hume, of course, who apparently once wrote in a letter that he's too rich and too fat to still give a damn about, but that's a direct quote, I'm too rich and I'm too fat to continue working. So Hume, what you can see with Hume, first of all, with Locke, and Kant says this explicitly in the first critique, with Locke you can see empiricism, is fantasy. I mean, you have notions of spiritual matter, etc., all of these very weird magical terms. But most importantly, with Hume, the skepticism of empiricism shows itself, and the looming nihilism also that could come with an extreme form of a Humean world, where in fact all of regularity breaks down. So on the one side, you have the dogmatic metaphysicians who dream up their wonderfully coherent systems, all coherent within terms of form and logic. And on the other side, you have the empiricists who, with Hume, explicitly were running after the experience, not able of establishing categories a priori. The experiences are not bound up. The regularity of the world breaks down. This is expressed by Hume when he says that, I don't know, this is a paraphrase, but I don't know whether the sun will rise tomorrow or not. So Kant, the usual story is this: Kant combines empiricism and rationalism. No, he refutes both of them. Transcendental idealism is its own utterly unique. This is why Kant is kind of just synthesis. It wouldn't be that great. So transcendental idealism bursts open a way, or a realm, I say, for, I can say in a vernacular sense perhaps, in which, in a transcendental manner, that's to say in a a priori conditions, necessary conditions a priori, can be posited so that there's a justification for the categories, that's transcendental deduction, so that we can make, so that experience becomes possible within, say, the parameters, and I speak very freely, are already set a priori before any experience. So if you hear someone say Kant is the philosopher who turns to experience, no, he actually says the experience is a product of the understanding. What Kant does is try to corroborate the conditions a priori that are necessary to make any experience. And by the way, if there are any questions, ask them now on the course and I will respond at the end of this. And if you do want to get the syllabus for this, just follow the link in the description of this video or here in the chat, type in your name, and then I'll be in touch when we open enrollment. We've had lots of interest last year and this year already, I think 40 or 50 people on the list. So there's always a cap. I usually cap students at around 30, 35 for the live seminars. So what Kant then does is not, rather than combining empiricism and rationalism or writing some benign epistemology, is he writes, he brings to the fore a logic of positing, one could almost say a Setzungslogik, that allows the categories of subjectivity, which he doesn't argue for, by the way, to be posited in such a way that the objectivity of objects are formed through those categories, and all of this is established a priori, before any experience. So what the first critique is doing, to a large degree, is setting up, is presupposing all of the necessary conditions such that can be, it's produced understanding, as it were. So in that sense, it's because of Kant that we can fly airplanes. But as I said, there will be other videos. There are other videos on this channel that you can find and listen to, so you can know better what this will be all about also in the course. With Kant, then we read, I'll just go over this now in less detail. So in the first critique, we'll consider the introduction, of course. The task of the critique will tie this together, because it's not just some benign epistemology. Kant brings back, or brings to the fore, the presupposition of all of thinking. He brings to the fore the presupposition of the unity of being and thought that was assumed, as it were, by, not assumed, but taken for granted, you could almost say, in Occidental thinking since Parmenides. And that collapses with Hume. The nihilism begins to show itself, right? Here, we'll show how Kant doesn't just respond to some isms of his time, but really sees the profound issue at hand, namely the collapse of the unity of being and thought. How he tries to bring it back together. With what? Well, with transcendental logic, transcendental idealism, where transcendental, again, doesn't mean going off and beyond the world, as it's often misunderstood, but now, where that means to set the necessary conditions a priori. We then also read the transcendental deduction. The transcendental deduction is, and also, of course, we'll discuss the noumenon. What is the noumenon? What is the noumenal? What is the phenomenal in Kant? What are the categories? And then, of course, we also on the question of freedom, the question of the Enlightenment, also with Kant. Kant, as you know, was a proponent of the Enlightenment, but also an early critic of the Enlightenment, and what it means for him to become aufgeklärt, which doesn't just mean enlightened, but really rather also cleared up. I guess that's a word, or cleared. There's a clearing shows itself. And by the way, a clearing is not necessarily Aufklärung. It's a German word. It's not necessarily a grand, but it can be a tremor of the sublime also in Aufklärung. I think Kant is very aware of this. So we will consider, however, only the Kant of the first critique. If you know the Kant from the second critique or the third critique, you're more than welcome to bring that Kant to the discussion. Of course, there's just is just not mentioned that much in the lectures. By the way, what I'll do for this year's course, is I'll add a few new videos, which will be one on Jakob Böhme and one on Baumgarten, who were both tremendously important, especially Böhme for Hegel and Schelling, as much as for later for Heidegger as well. So the third lecture, so there are 6 lectures in total for this course, and if you want to get the study guide, enrollment isn't open yet, so all you can do now is sign up via the link and you get the study guide. And I know that you're interested, so I can email you when we open enrollment. The third lecture is on Fichte and the transcendental ego. And what with Fichte really comes to the fore was something that's already there as a thread in Kant, namely subjectivism. That the subject begins to hypothesize itself as absolute, while in this positing there's already a contradiction that shows itself. Fichte's subject, I would assume, is one through itself positing that's struggling against the non-I, against nature, and in so doing crowds out nature. Nature disappears for Fichte. And it disappears for Fichte insofar as we can see here, and we will go into this in the lectures in more detail, because transcendental logic and transcendental idealism really just pushes things as they are in themselves, the real, if you like, into the realm of the noumenal. And that specter of solipsism really shows itself with Fichte, and that struggle against subjectivism, because he also knows that this is where nihilism looms, but still Fichte, I don't think, will come out of it. So the Fichte we'll consider is the Fichte of the Wissenschaftslehre, and not so much the Fichte of its ethical writings. But we try and show in the lectures that Fichte really brings this to an end. We'll mention Reinhold also, and Salomon Maimon to some degree. There's a video on Salomon Maimon here also on the course. Salomon Maimon was instrumental. He was really crucial he's not very much considered. But without Maimon, I think this gentleman from Lithuania, who I think, if I'm not wrong, I might be wrong, so I do apologize if I if I misremember something, but I think he learned German, or at least perfected his German, really to be able to respond to Kant. And he wrote this beautiful essay on transcendental philosophy, but still he assumes that it doesn't really win out against skepticism. But it is exactly, it's these warnings from Salomon Maimon that really, you could almost say, not cause but trigger the further movement. So Reinhold popularizes Kant, but Maimon is often referred to, or not often, but is referred to by Hegel. And I think Hegel sees that these warnings against the limitations of the transcendental philosophy really come to the fore in Salomon Maimon's book. So highly recommended. There is also a video here on the channel. Just type in my name, Niederhauser, Salomon Maimon, you'll find it. So after Fichte, we really move into what's considered German idealism. German idealism doesn't begin with Kant, but Kant is the foundation of it, as Kant is the foundation for everything post-Kant. It's all post-Kantian, after all. We're all footnotes to Kant or so. Well, that's nonsense, but, just to paraphrase on that ridiculous quote from Whitehead on Plato. The three men here, the three thinkers who are usually considered German idealists, are Hölderlin, Schelling, and Hegel. And you will find that some commentators think that German idealism ends with Schelling, but that would be a mistake. I think that only happens, when you don't see the true depth and scope of Kant's critical philosophy, and when you believe that it's an epistemology, then you don't see the necessity of Hegel's science of logic. By the way, also don't conflate German idealism with German romanticism. People like commentators such as Roger Scruton has a weird, or had, he's dead, so rest in peace. But Scruton had sometimes, I think, a bit of a really strange notion about German. So he called Kant a German romantic. He didn't seem to make much of a distinction between the Schlegel brothers and Hegel. That is really striking. So Kant is not a romantic. The German idealists are not romantics. Even in a very good book that I do appreciate a lot and also recommend anyone to read, which is German Idealism by Frederick Beiser, includes, well, he's free to do that. He includes Novalis and Schlegel and others of the more romantic tradition. The ironic, cold distance, dreaming of childhood that never was, etc. That's not really what German idealism aims for, which is a rejuvenation and a reconnection of the human being with the real and with nature. And that really begins with Hölderlin, Schelling, and Hegel. Now, who are they? Nietzsche refers to them, and as Nietzsche is wont to do, in an almost, a bit, not begrudgingly, but he's a bit cynical almost. He calls them the three theologians from Tübingen. And maybe you didn't know this, but Hölderlin, Schelling, and Hegel were all roommates at the Stift in Tübingen when they studied theology together. So by fate, by the command of fate, which the only reason that fate does anything is that we help each other, and the way in which these three young men who all became friends and stayed friends for most of their lives, and well, they read Heraclitus together. Heraclitus, especially the gnomoi, or the fragments of Heraclitus, where he addresses the one and many, hen kai pan in Greek. And the fragment 50 perhaps is the most important one. Uk emu ala tu logo akusantas homologein sophonistin hen panta enai. So not to me, but to Logos having listened, it is wise to say, sophonistin hen panta enai. One many is, that one is many. And by reverse, that many is one. So they read this and they want to, and you will find throughout their texts attempts at saying again how one is many and how many, or all is one and one is all. Maybe I should say all instead of many. And in Hölderlin, and also, of course, also a return to nature and to spirit, the absolute is making a return, but one that goes well beyond the attempts of dogmatic philosophy that's pre-Kantian. So there's not a move back to pre-Kant, which is impossible. That's a pure abstraction. So anyone who's attempting to say, well, Kant never happened, and the realists, the so-called new real, whenever says something it's new, a new ism, run for your life. Better run, just run, or just don't even, because I think new realism will very, very soon give rise to a new nominalism, which doesn't sound so catchy. So I think they'll call it new skepticism or so. And you can do that, and it probably is probably a good career move if you're inside academia. So maybe any young academics listening, maybe you should start the new skepticism movement, and because that's where you cash in. So but anyways, apart from that, I'll stay a bit on the surface here. You forgive me that I just touch upon what we'll be reading together. From Hölderlin, we'll consider a poem which is in German entitled Die Muße, leisure, where he really brings together man, nature, animal, the spirit of rest, the spirit of unrest, and so the one and all in this one beautiful poem in Scolaire, in which the human being dwells and dies. And we also consider his Harmonie der Entgegensetzung, so the harmony of oppositionality. I think I translated that as, and his poetical I, which is not in opposition to, but which is different from the transcendental ego. Yeah. So it's a direct response to not so much Kant, but more to Fichte that we find in Hölderlin with the poetical I. So that's a lecture on Hölderlin, one of the three thinkers who were born when they became friends in Tübingen. For Schelling, what we're going to read is his Freiheitsaufsatz on the treatise, I think in English it's über das Wesen der menschlichen Freiheit, on the essence of human freedom. And we'll consider, so there's a video here on this channel that you can watch, also Schelling on Evil, which is also based on this essay. In the lecture, however, we won't discuss evil that much. We will discuss Schelling's relationship with Spinoza, his notion of the will, his understanding of nature, and his critique or criticism of pantheism, and of course also, most importantly, his thinking together of freedom and necessity and what the hell that's supposed to mean and why it is important to think together in this moment, necessity and freedom. So here we rise to the level of human freedom fully, really, with Schelling, with this lecture on Schelling. And of course, the grand finale will be Hegel. When I wrote the lecture last year, and I'm going to rewrite some of the lectures again this year, it absolutely, as always with Hegel, exploded. I will be publishing a video on Hegel in about 2 or 3 weeks, where I speak freely on Hegel for about an hour. And I thought it would be about maybe 20 minutes or so a summary, and you can't. It is impossible. Hegel always explodes and expands and expands. The Hegel we'll consider, though, is the Hegel of the science of logic. So with Hegel, we will see why in the science of logic, and especially also with the encyclopedia, why Hegel is the completion of German idealism, why he dissolves the aporias of Kant's first critique of Kant's critical philosophy, in what sense the aporia of the antinomy of reason is dissolved in Hegel. We'll consider the question of what is the idea in Hegel, what is the absolute, what does he mean by nature and spirit, what does he mean by infinity, by the bad infinite, what is presuppositionalist philosophy. So if you've been here all this time, or if you haven't, maybe you can go back afterwards and listen to this live stream again. When I mentioned Kant, I said, what the first critique does is presupposing, an entire body of conditions so that experience becomes possible. And Hegel suspends with all presupposition that begins to think again from scratch, as it were, from being, pure being, in order to establish, or to let's establish rather, the categories of thinking and of our access to world and nature, which Kant can, justify to some degree why they apply to the manifold, but Kant never argues for the emergence or the origin of the categories. That only really is found in Hegel. And so what we'll consider with Hegel is mostly, if not exclusively, the science of logic. And if there are any questions, by the way, now is the time to ask before I leave. If you do want to get the syllabus, there's a link here in the description of the video down below. And also in the live chat, you can just go to my website, to my Halcyon Guild website. You'll find the description of the course. And if you scroll a bit down, you find a contact form where you can get the study guide. So you fill that out. If you give me your email address, then a new tab opens and you can download the PDF from there, which gives you a bit better idea about what the course will be on. And just to be clear about what, maybe I'll say a few things now on on the course. So we'll open enrollment in about, 3 weeks or so, or 4 weeks in mid-May. The course will begin I think on June 18th, 6 to 8 p.m. UK time. So that's very good for people, especially in America, who want to join in at 9 a.m. or around lunchtime, depending on where you are, whether you're East Coast, West Coast, or somewhere around Central Mountain Time. We usually have a group of people coming in from all over the world. We're currently teaching a course on Japanese philosophy, which includes Nishitani, where we have someone from, I think, Kenya, a couple of ladies from Portugal, a few people in the US, and you're all coming in this weird non-place that is Zoom, and then you go about your daily lives again afterwards. Because if your interest lies in, say, Marxism, you need to have a grounding in German idealism. If your interest lies in 20th century phenomenology, be that Heidegger or Merleau-Ponty, then also you do need to have a firm grounding in German idealism. Kant is fundamental to Heidegger and also to Merleau-Ponty. If you Deleuze without Hegel, why do you read Deleuze? Derrida works himself, off on, with Hegel and Schelling, and of course we will have some poetic relief also. Thanks to Hölderlin. Now, here's a very good question. That's the kind of question I like. How much of the primary material will be read in the course? Well, so we'll only read the main readings, are only primary readings. So primary material, as they say, primary sources, perhaps. What we will be reading in Kant is, as much as you can, really, of the first critique. So it's the introduction of the preface, the transcendental aesthetics, the main parts, the transcendental deduction, which is quite difficult. From Fichte, we'll read excerpts from, and of course, as much as you can, excerpts from the Wissenschaftslehre. With Hölderlin, it'll be a bit less reading because we'll focus on the poem and some of the writings on the poetical I or the poetical ego. With Schelling, we'll read the treatise on the essence of human freedom. So if you can manage to read the entire essay, that's excellent. If you don't, I will give very clear indications of what to read. And you're always, of course, welcome. So as I said before, if you are very firm and well-read in Kant's third critique, please bring that up, because I do think that Kant, by the third critique, realizes what he had forgotten to do in the first critique, which may not have been possible there. And so tries to bring also nature back, especially with the notion of the sublime, etc. With Hegel, that's going to be a bit difficult, but we will read parts of the science of logic, especially so the beginning, being, nothing, becoming. And you don't need to shy away from this. It's tremendously complex or difficult, yes, but it's readable. And also excerpts on the infinite, the bad infinite, the good infinite, etc. And there is obviously there's very good secondary literature. I would recommend Stephen Holgate's books on Hegel. I've mentioned, I'm looking up at my bookshelf here, I've recommended before German Idealism by Friedrich Beisser. I have a German book here by Richard Kroner, Von Kant bis Hegel. If you're German speaking, I would highly recommend you get a copy of that one as well. So I think for this course, if you want to have secondary literature, it really is Beisser's German Idealism and Stephen Holgate's An Introduction to Hegel, and also, of course, Stephen's book on the opening of the science of logic. So, but the primary sources, again, excerpts from Kant's first critique, from the transcendental aesthetic and the transcendental deduction, mostly, also the preface. What does he mean by the Copernican turn? What does he mean by metaphysics has become a battlefield? And Fichte, parts of the Wissenschaftslehre, probably mostly from 1804. Hölderlin a little less, because we need some downtime, but we'll find that this is our poetic relief, as it were. And once we move to Schelling, we'll read again the entire essay on freedom, and with Hegel excerpts, as I said before, of the science of logic, mostly, or maybe if you prefer, from the encyclopedia, which is a condensed repetition of the science of logic. So it's a very good question. I very much favor reading the primary sources and not shying away from them. It's better you read the primary sources and walk away confused and discombobulated and perhaps, a bit, as I said before, confused, but also a bit worried that you didn't understand it. That's healthier than reading some cheap summary that just gives you that sensation of like a cheap beer of a promise of understanding or knowing, where in fact it there's no substance. So we actually only will read, and I quote a few people. I quote Holgate, and I quote Max Gottschlich, and I quote Frederick Beiser, but I work myself with the original texts most of the time, actually all the time, in German, and then translate that into English myself, and work out through my many years of studying these thinkers what they can tell us today. Okay, so that should be it from me. If you want to get the syllabus, please do follow this link here, which you should be able to find a link to, well, not a link, what do you call this? A contact form, I suppose, where you will be able to type in all your details. Please give me your name, your real email address, so I can contact you when we open enrollment. Was last year one of the most successful courses, and so I do want to offer it again this year. There will also be a course running in parallel on Leisure with Dignity, which is on Cicero, Plato, Aristotle, and Joseph Pieper, Nietzsche, Wilhelm von Humboldt, Heidegger, etc. So that one will run on the Sunday. This one, German Idealism, will probably be on the Saturdays. And if you have any questions when you come to this later, etc., that's fine. Just leave the question as a comment down below of this video, and I will respond in time. Not immediately, obviously, but I will respond if there are good questions and on the course. So, and I might do a live stream again on this course when I open it, or maybe before, just to see where people are. Maybe you have a question, then just let me know then. So excellent. Thank you very much for listening. And thank you also, Kaido Loveboat, for the very good question. And I should hope to see you all at the course, actually, in about 2 months from now, which is, our summer school. So how do you spend your summer? Well, I read German Idealism, so why not? Okay. Thank you all. Thank you. Good night. Well, what should I always say? I shall retire. I always forget. I shall retire.